Well, hello there, my beloved soul seeker, You-est YOU listener, dear friend. You are in for such a lovely treat. I feel like I am interviewing a soul sister. While we haven't officially met for a long time, she feels like somebody that I've gone way back with, and I think you're going to feel the same way. I'm so excited for you to meet Nancy Levin. Nancy Levin is a master life coach, radio host, and best-selling author of 5 books, including her latest, Setting Boundaries Will Set You Free, the ultimate guide to telling the truth, creating connection, and finding freedom. She has coached thousands of people to live on their own terms by making themselves a priority and setting boundaries that stick. So excited to hear about this. Formerly the event director at Hay House from 2002 to 2014, Nancy now teaches regularly at Kripalu, 1440 Multiversity, and the Hay House Writers Workshop. And she also recently launched Levin Life Coach Academy, a premier life coaching training and certification program designed to revolutionize the industry. She received her MFA in Creative Writing and Poetics from Naropa University in Boulder, Colorado, and she continues to live in the beautiful Rocky Mountains. Most importantly, I'm just so excited we get to be present today together and to have you on the You-est YOU show. Welcome, Nancy.
Thank you so much. I am delighted to be here with you.
Oh my gosh. Well, I'm laughing because before we started, I was like, oh my gosh, I just want to continue talking to you. And then it's better record because this could be an hour. Knowing me, we're going to keep talking and forget. And then
I know you feel like an old friend. You feel like someone like I would have gone to camp with or something like that.
Oh,
like
totally.
Yeah.
I love it. I'll take that. Yes. Yeah. Maybe we did. I don't know. We can find out after. Maybe I went to a bunch of different camps.
Ooh.
Yeah. So, I mean, my goodness, what an amazing background that you have. And before I really want to dive into setting boundaries. That is, I know my listeners are like, yes, I need some of that, including myself over here. Like, we need to dive into that. I think what would be cool is to hear a little bit maybe about your pre-journey, even before, working with Hay House and all your work there. Just, maybe did you struggle with boundaries? Did you have any area? I'm assuming maybe, because if you wrote about it, I know I've learned, I write about what I've struggled with.
Of course, we teach what we need to learn. Yes, I mean, certainly I would say that I struggled with boundaries my whole life. And I wouldn't have even known that I wouldn't even have languaged it that way, because I think, like many of us, we first of all didn't even know what a boundary was. We didn't know it was something we were allowed to have, and no one really taught us how to set them effectively.
Yeah.
And especially if anyone listening identifies as a people pleaser, a peacekeeper, a conflict avoider, a not rock the boater, a rescuer, fixer, saver, any one of us who fall into that camp, we can be certain that we have not had boundaries in our life because we've been living our lives other referenced. So we've abandoned ourselves for the sake of someone else. And many of us have been doing that for most of our lives, and it becomes a way of life. And so for me personally, I will say that I did not set my first effective and ultimately life-altering boundary until about 10 years ago.
Wow.
And it really changed the course of my life, because it was the very first time that I was actually willing to put myself first, that I was willing to honor myself more ultimately than I was wanting to be liked, or than I was wanting to be seen in a certain way. I spent most of my life really projecting this image of perfection to the world and managing the perception of others. So really giving them the lens to see me through. And so that takes a lot of energy and maintenance.
Oh, yeah.
One thing I really learned when I finally shed the armor and the mask and the cape, and when I finally really emerged into the truth of who I am, was that I discovered I had so much more energy, I felt so much more resourced than I ever had before in my life. It takes so much. We don't even realize what it takes to keep ourselves packaged to be digestible to somebody else. So, you know, if I go all the way back, and I will, because it's, to me, it's part of the constellation of my life. The first really significant event of my life was the fact that I was born into a family where my older brother was quite ill. And it was the 1960s. They didn't have the tests that they have now. So it took many months for my parents to really recognize something was wrong with him, because he wasn't sitting up and rolling over and raising his head and doing the things that babies do. It took several months for them to realize something was wrong. So when I was born, I should say, my mother and I have had adult conversations about this. My mother told me that when I was born, she purposefully did not attach to me because she was waiting to see what was wrong with me. Wow. And so this is really the time in our lives when our limiting beliefs begin, when our shadow beliefs are imprinted. Significant events occur. We're under the age of 10, and we're drawing conclusions about ourselves because we're too young to process and digest what's happening in a healthy way. We just make these things mean something about us. So I, you know, having done the work I've done on myself as an adult through coaching, through therapy, I can really recognize that this was really an origin point of beliefs around, you know, better I be self-sufficient and independent and have no needs because his needs are more important than mine. He needs the attention. I'll take care of myself. Also, this belief around there must be something wrong with me if I'm under this kind of scrutiny, if I'm not being attached to. Questions around my own worth if I'm not being given attention in a particular way. And really ultimately also, you know, if I'm imperfect like he is, I will die, because that's what happened. He died when he was 6 and I was 2.
Oh my gosh.
So the imprint around that of I now need to do everything I can in my life to be perfect and to be, and then all, you know, our limiting beliefs often also sound like some version of I'm not enough, I'm not good enough. And also this idea of now I need to be more than myself. I need to be 2 children for my parents. And so I really went about trying to heal a grief in my parents that can never be healed. And then, you know, we what happens is then we grow up and we internalize these beliefs. And the crazy thing about our beliefs is that they're not fact, but they're very magnetic. We'll start to draw toward us relationships and circumstances and people that will reinforce what we believe about ourselves. So fast forward to the man that I marry. It was literally as if on the day we met, he said, "Hi, I'm broken." And I said, "Well, great. I'm Superwoman. I will fix you." And so, you know, as we became more enmeshed and as the relationship progressed, I really sublimated all my wants and needs and desires in service of his. And it really became an overlay of, I couldn't save my brother. Maybe I can save you. I couldn't heal my parents. Maybe I can heal you. And swooping in as the rescuer and the fixer and the saver, which, as we all know, as hard of a lesson as it is to learn, it is impossible. Right? So I was in this marriage where I was lost. I really lost myself in this marriage, partially because of, you know, my own makeup and the way that I entered it, but also I was married to a man who was full of rage and I was silent. I was a powerhouse in the world of work, but at home, I never said a thing. And I didn't know how to use my voice. I didn't know how to stand up for myself. I didn't know how to have an opinion because there was essentially brainwashing happening around that, you know, I don't know how to think for myself. It got to a state whereas when I sit here right now and like think back on this moment, it got to a place where he literally controlled what I wore, what I ate, how I exercised. He measured my body fat once a week. I was really living inside of this cage.
Wow.
And I had really essentially gone numb because I didn't know what else to do. And so the pivotal point was when, and it was actually the anniversary of it just passed as we're recording this, on April 12th, 2008, I was on my way home from a Hay House cruise, a live event we did on a cruise ship. And I was on my way home, and this is all documented in pretty much all my books. But I mean, I was at the airport on my way home and received a voicemail from my then husband saying, "I've read your journals. You better get your ass home. There's hell to pay."
Oh my God.
And exactly. Oh my God. So, oh my God, I have 70 volumes of my journal. Oh my God, what did he read? You know, all the oh my gods. And so I essentially flew home and called a friend in the car on the way back to my apartment. And she said to me, you know, if I were you, I wouldn't go home. I would actually go check yourself. She knew that there's a hotel a couple blocks away. She said, go check yourself into the St. Julian. And at least then you have an exit strategy and somewhere to go if you decide to go talk to him. And so I did exactly that. I walked up the stairs to my condo, and he was standing in the hallway, in the doorway. He had heard me walking up. So he was right there holding 4 volumes of my journal. And he said, I'm going to make copies of pages and send them to your family, your friends, your coworkers, and let's see what they think when they find out about the real Nancy. So he knew that my greatest fear was any sort of exposure. I'd been really living by the motto, never let them see you sweat. And no one can push your buttons like someone you've been married to for 18 years. So I knew in that moment I had a choice. I could either go back to sleep, or I could really step into the opportunity that was being presented to me. So I will tell you, it took me 2 years to leave the marriage, even after that. And I did leave the house that night. I went to the hotel, and the next morning he called me and he said, if you're not home in 20 minutes, I'm going to call your parents and your sister. And since I knew he wasn't bluffing, and since I knew that it was really time for me to take responsibility for my own life, I got my parents on the phone. And I said, it's highly likely that we're going to get divorced. And my mother said to me, what happened? And I said, I got home last night and he read my journals and he discovered I had an affair 8 years ago. And my mother, without missing a beat, said, I'm so sorry to know that you've been carrying this around all by yourself for 8 years. And in that moment, I knew that the dissolution of my marriage would become the great healing with my mother, which it has.
Wow.
And so it was that moment in time that began my journey back to myself, my journey of being able to tell the truth. You know, who I often will say I set a bomb in my journal to detonate 8 years later, because I didn't know how to tell the truth at that point. I didn't know how to tell the truth to myself. I didn't know how to tell the truth to him. I didn't know how to say, I don't want to be here anymore. So I did what at the time made sense to me. I'm not sitting here, you know, advocating for infidelity. However, it's what she could do at the time to find some space amidst all of it, and to be able to stay. Because really, I will tell you right now, if he had not read my journals, I would still be there. I mean, I literally thank God he read my journals, because it was the catalyst to me being able to get free, because I wouldn't have left otherwise. You know, I waited for a crisis, and I think many of us wait for a crisis. I mean, even if we look at what's happening right now in the world, I do think that this moment in time is giving a lot of people illumination into changes that they've wanted to make in their lives, but haven't had the courage or confidence to do so before. But there's something that's happening right now. There's, some alchemical situation that's having us look at, obviously this is a delineation point of before and after. And what is after going to look like? And how do I actually get to participate in what after looks like for me? And so, I'm often a big proponent of rock your own foundation before it rocks you. We don't have to wait for a crisis to make the changes we want to make. And yet so many of us wait. And so it was really that moment that led me to where I am now. I was the event director at Hay House. I always say I had a front row seat and a backstage pass to all the greats, which was a dream. It was my dream job that I never in a million years thought I would ever leave.
Yeah, I'm like, we got to talk about that. I mean,
we can talk about any of that, of course.
I grew up with Louise Hay when I was 11.
Yes.
In the mirror.
Yes.
I mean, it's another story, but right. So you didn't think you could ever have it, you were saying.
Yeah. I mean, I didn't think I would ever leave that job. And but what started to happen is that as I got the courage to share what was happening in my life, which took a while. It took about a year actually before I started bringing people into what was going on. And the people I feared revealing myself to the most were the ones who rallied around me the fiercest. And I will tell you, I remember the day that I told Louise Hay what was happening.
Yeah.
And really it was some version of, Louise, I need to tell you, I'm not perfect. And, she put her hands on my shoulders and she looked deep in my eyes and she just said, darling, did you think that I thought you were the only person that was? And I said, well, I did. And I'll tell you, Louise became I always say she was like my personalized affirmation action figure. She rallied for me hard. And I will tell you, I absolutely credit Louise for really teaching me the value of vulnerability, the true value of vulnerability, and how being vulnerable is the only thing that will ever create intimacy in our lives. Because when we're living in hiding, which I was completely living in hiding, because we all on some level think we have to hide some part of ourselves in order to be loved and accepted. Yeah. Whether it's some quality or some skeleton in the closet secret. So, when I was able to come out of hiding, I was able to be loved and I was able to be supported. And it took a lot to get to that place. But that was ultimately, and it was really Debbie Ford, who had been my friend and who I had done a lot of events for through Hay House. She was the one who said, let your staff do this event. You sit your ass in the chair, do the work that's actually going to support you in being able to leave your marriage. And so on the other side of doing that particular workshop, I ended up being coached by one of her coaches, going through her year-long coach training program while I still had my Hay House job, while I was still traveling 200 days a year. And I did her training program, and that was it, because on the other end of that year training, I was unrecognizable. And so that's the moment when I really made the choice that it was time to go.
I have chills all over my arms just listening to you. What jumps out is a couple things. The lack of boundaries from him, like the antithesis of having a healthy boundary, but then the gift of those journals. And it's interesting, our different scenario, but our wake up and marriage dissolution happened at almost exactly the same time, which is fascinating. So I'm like, oh, we'll talk.
I love that. Yes. Like,
more similarities than, but it's and then to be in this environment, I mean, I like to just be coddled and nurtured by the most probably the
I know.
loving, compassionate, wise human beings. You know, I mean, I know Louise, I still feel like she is with me. It's so funny. You got to know her. I mean, her energy that just spread, and then to be surrounded by that, and cocooned by that while you went through that. Oh my God.
I know, I have chills because the year of 2010, I basically lived between Louise's house, Debbie Ford's house, Cheryl Richardson's house, and my sister's house.
Wow.
I spent literally a year, like, not in my own home.
Wow.
And and especially with Louise, like, my memories of Louise are just, you know, waking up in the morning and her making me like a smoothie, you know, and we're sitting at her kitchen counter, like, having smoothies. Like, those are some of the most precious and sacred memories that I have.
Wow. What? I'm like, it's another story, another day. She has come through to me in my meditations.
Oh,
She
I love
literally,
hearing that.
I feel her. I mean,
Yeah.
my mom was in very openly 12-step recovery. And so she was very into Louise Hay. Like, I'm talking 10 and 11.
I love that. I love hearing that. I do.
Listen to her. Like, you know, these are like when we had tapes. Like,
I love it.
Raised me. I felt like she raised me. And so I'm like, it's so great that you got to communicate. I'd always I had this feeling I'd meet her. And I'm like, well, I'm meeting her on the other side.
Yeah.
Yeah.
She's still, she's still here. Like, I still, you know, and I mean, I can go super woo woo, but this isn't even super woo woo. She just is here.
Yeah.
You know, she just is.
Yeah. Well, I feel her. I just, for you to be surrounded by that, it's such and that's, I'm like, wow. I mean, that's incredible. The learning, the wisdom, clearly that's within you too, because whatever we bring in, we attract, we have. And so it took you, and it's amazing to me. Like, I'm so with you. It takes time to, like, really do the whole caterpillar to butter. I mean, it's a big ordeal. And I can see why you are writing about boundaries now. Tell us, like, so 2010, what evolved? And I am actually curious. I think others listening might be curious.
Anything.
Because Hay House, you know, I've just, ever since I fell in love with Louise, and she kind of was this grandmother I had and didn't know, I just pretended we knew each other. You know, she's really, she attracted such luminary. She still does. I mean, still does. And for you to be in that world, I'm curious, like, how you decided to move on, and then what she shifted for you around boundaries to the point where, I mean, obviously today, different person.
Yes. I love this whole question because it's actually so, it's so intertwined.
Yeah.
So in 2010, really, there was from 2009 to 2010, there was a series of 5 times that my husband kicked me out of the house.
Oh my gosh.
And it was the 5th time that I did not go back. And that was really the first boundary I set. So I was the breadwinner. I bought and paid for everything. So he's kicking me out of a house that I essentially own and pay for. And I didn't have any way to stand in in anything being mine. I had no idea how to say no. And I was constantly living in fear of conflict.
Yeah.
I was constantly living in fear of being raged at or being given the silent treatment. And so the thing about my ex-husband is that, so as much as I was raised with my parents are still married. They are really truly in love. And I did not grow up with a lot of crazy fighting and yelling and, you know, just regular Jewish yelling, but like not crazy, you know, not crazy fighting. He grew up 180 degrees different. He grew up with, like, you know, a lot of violence, a lot of abuse, beating, you know, a lot of anger. And I really thought that I could just bring my whole family around him and heal him. And so this was this was oil and water, you know?
Yeah.
And so that final boundary that I was able to set of not going back.
Yeah.
Or, you know, I would say not even the final, that ultimate boundary, the first boundary I set of not going back that final time was what set everything else in motion, was what allowed everything else to be in motion.
Right.
For me to actually begin telling the truth, being able to tell others the truth, being able to stand in my own voice and my own value and my own worth, being able to say no. You know, all of that began, I'm not joking, 10 years ago.
Yeah.
But then I'll even go on to say, you know, and there's a story in the introduction of Setting Boundaries Will Set You Free that really, to me, illustrates how the reason I was so exceptional at my job was that I had no boundaries.
Right.
So there's a story in there that has me flying across the country to retrieve Wayne Dyer's briefcase. And, you know, it's one of the most boundaryless acts I've ever performed, because I was really doing it to chase the gold stars, which is really how I lived my life.
Mm-hmm.
I lived my life, you know, always seeking external validation, approval, applause, wanting the gold stars. And the thing is, I was in a particular position and profession where I got a lot of gold stars.
Yeah.
But no gold stars will ever be enough to fill the void. Yeah. Because, you know, whatever we're seeking externally, we need to resolve internally first. And I was really unwilling to resolve anything inside of myself. I didn't want to know myself, and I didn't want anyone else to know me either. And so it wasn't until I was really able to step into a new way of being with myself that things could really begin to shift. And so once this was all happening, and once, you know, I went through Debbie's coaching program, the irony was that right as I was getting divorced, two of my coworkers at Hay House were getting married. And as you mentioned in the introduction, I have a master's in poetry. So they had asked me if I would write a poem and read it during their wedding ceremony. So the irony of this, you know. So I do this. I write the poem and read it during their wedding. And Reed Tracy, the president of Hay House, heard the poem, and he was like, "You're a real poet." And I said, "Well, of course I'm a real poet." And he said, "Well, you know, I think that you should start sharing your poems as you're emceeing the events." Because so we were doing these giant events, thousands and thousands of people, and I was the MC. So I have a theater background. I love to be on stage. I loved all that. As much as I loved all the backstage producing, I also loved, you know, introducing the speakers and all that. But it's very different, you know, introducing a speaker and announcing the lunch break and saying where the bathrooms are. Very different to then get on stage and, you know, share a part of my soul. And so I will never forget, it was one of the first times that I actually was in Pasadena, and it was in an I Can Do It, and I was introducing Wayne Dyer on a Friday night, and I went out and read a poem before introducing him. And a woman came up to me at the end of the evening and said, I thought I came to this conference to hear Wayne Dyer, but I came here to hear that poem.
Oh, wow.
And it floored me, because I had never thought about publishing. I'd never even thought about really sharing my work publicly. I was writing for myself. I thought my work is so personal, but really the truth of the matter is, when it's that personal, it becomes universal. Yeah. And that's what I learned. I learned that, you know, how much something can resonate when it really is that personal. So it was really Reed who, you know, sort of pushed me out on stage to start reading my poems. And then we were programming a conference. This was like 2012. We were programming a conference where we were doing this new thing at Hay House. We wanted to do something where it was like, the slogan kind of was, "It's not your mother's Hay House." So we were wanting to bring in all these younger voices. So that was really when we started bringing in, Gabby Bernstein and Nick Ortner and Megan Watterson and a lot of new young voices. And we were programming and doing it sort of TED style, like everyone was getting a 20-minute block. And he said, put yourself in for 20 minutes. And I was like, what are you crazy? Like, what am I going to talk about? He's like, you got a story, you've got a story to tell. Put yourself in for 20 minutes, and then, so he's been my like cheerleader all along. Then he was the one who said, put together a book of your poems. We're not publishing it. It's, it's poetry, but you should self-publish a book of your poems. And so I did. I self-published a book of my poems. And then he said, you should now write a real book, and you should self-publish that too. Like he still wasn't, he was on board to a point. Right. He's like, but you should write your story. You should write a real book, and you should self-publish that too. And so this was now about 2013. Yeah, 2013. And I was out for a walk with him in Melbourne, Australia. We were doing an event there. We were out for a walk. And I said, so he actually said to me, so I notice you're like at the end of your rope. And I said, I am. I'm really at the end of the rope. In fact, I asked you to come on this walk with me today because I want to let you know that I'm going to quit my job. And he said, I'll tell you when you can quit your job. He said, here's the deal. You need to really work your side hustle. You need to get coaching clients. You need to build your platform. You need to publish this book. You need to get everything ready so that when you do leave, you have something to go to.
Wow.
Right? So,
wow.
I know. Wow. So this was like August 2013. And then I self-published Jump in Your Life Will Appear in February of 2014. And in May of 2014, Reed called me and said, hey, your book is doing really well. We want to pick it up.
Oh my gosh. So
Hay House picked up the book in early May of 2014. And then about 2 weeks later, he called me and he said, okay, you can go now.
Oh my gosh.
And I bawled my eyes out and I'm like, are you firing me? And he said, this was our plan all along. And he said, and I'll tell you right now that if you don't go today, if you don't go now, you're not going to go.
Oh my God.
And so we made a plan to take me through the summer to train my staff. The woman who ended up taking my job had been with me from day one. So she knew the whole drill. I trained I got her up and going, my whole staff. I spent the summer really, getting everything in line. And then at the end of August 2014, that was my last day.
Oh my gosh. That is.
Yeah.
Incredible.
It was incredible. Like, I mean, he really, and so this is something, and I'm sure you can appreciate this, but this is something that I love about being a coach is that, I'm holding a vision for my clients that they can't hold for themselves yet, and it's like, you don't need to believe, but just believe that I believe yes. That I can see what you can't see yet. And he has always been that holder of me.
Unbelievable. So it's like, I'm just taking it in. I'm like, what a story. I mean, the whole, I had to take a moment when you're like, I had to go get Wayne Dyer's briefcase. which, I loved him.
I loved him too.
I mean, I know you got to know him. Can feel his energy was very, very special.
Very. I feel so incredibly blessed that I was as close with Louise and as close with him.
Yeah.
And, and Debbie Ford. It's like, I really feel like the three of them are they really are my angels. I mean, it's true.
Yeah, absolutely. And then Reed kind of stepping in, like, almost felt like almost parental, like he's like, I got you. And yeah, he is that way for like, that is how people respond to him for sure. Wow. Yeah. Wow. This is an amazing story. I'm glad. Yeah. And so you went on your own in 2014. I did. And then, I mean, I'm sort of like, just keep talking.
Just keep talking. So I wrote
you and like boundaries.
Right. I know. So I wrote
you, Nancy.
Oh, you're so sweet. You're so sweet. So then actually Hay House came to me and said, hey, let's sign you up for your next book. And Worthy was the next book I wrote, which was all about boosting your self-worth to grow your net worth. And it really originated out of my divorce mediation.
Oh, wow.
So as I mentioned before, I was the breadwinner, and
right.
my husband really just didn't want to work. He just didn't want to work. He just wanted to play all the time. And I ultimately created a lifestyle for him where he got to do that.
Wow.
And so when the divorce mediation came, we have no children.
Okay.
And I own 2 condos. When the divorce mediation comes, and my lawyer has said to me, our position is no maintenance, because he actually is very able-bodied and capable and talented and able to work. He just did not want to, and I enabled him to not have to.
Right.
So my lawyer said our position here is no maintenance. So the mediation was, I don't actually talk about this too much, but this piece I will say here, because I trust you and I trust everybody listening.
Yeah,
so
that's the best listeners ever.
The relationship had gotten to a place where there had been physical violence and threat of more physical violence. So I ultimately got a restraining order.
Oh gosh.
So for the mediation, we weren't actually in the same room. So the mediator would go back and forth between rooms. He was in his room with a lawyer. I was in my room with a lawyer, and the mediator would come back and forth. So just remember, no kids. It was a 9-hour mediation.
I don't even understand that.
No, there's no way to understand that. There's no way to understand that, because what happened is the mediator came in and said he wants, they want whatever, X amount of dollars a month. They want this, they want that, they want this, they want that. And I think, because my lawyer has said to me, our position is no maintenance, that I think my lawyer's going to say no.
Okay.
But my lawyer didn't say no. My lawyer started negotiating. And because I didn't know I could say no.
Oh my God.
It went on to the point where I ended up giving him a property, paying his rent in that property for 3 years, or paying his mortgage in that property for 3 years, a property that ultimately went into foreclosure because he couldn't take it over after the 3 years. I ended up absorbing his debt. I ended up, there were all these things that I walked in the room thinking,
oh gosh,
that none of this was going to happen. But this was like the catch-22 moment of my life, because had this not happened, I wouldn't have found my no. I didn't find it that day, mind you. And it took a while, believe me, because I kept blaming my lawyer.
Yeah.
And I kept blaming him. But the truth is, I was the responsible party who said yes.
Yep.
Ultimately, I signed a piece of paper.
Right.
Ultimately, I said yes.
Right.
And this was probably one of the most powerful lessons of my life.
Yeah.
And absolutely a lesson around boundaries. Because we have to find our no to free our yes.
Yes. Yeah.
And no part of me could say no. I couldn't stand up and say, I need to call a halt to these proceedings and we'll resume another day. No part of me even knew that I could do that. It wasn't even it wasn't on my map. And so I ultimately created a scenario where I enabled him to have things that really weren't okay for him to have, but I ultimately said yes. So, as we all do, that became a book. And that really became the root origin story piece for Worthy.
Mm.
And then I went on to write another book that's called, it came out as new relationship blueprint, and it got retitled for the paperback, Permission to Put Yourself First, which I
I
love.
love it. I love that.
Yep. And so really it was all about how to be in a relationship after the one that fell apart or broke your heart, how to do it again without doing it again.
Yeah.
How not to recreate the same relationship. And that was really, I would say, even though boundaries has had a through line in every one of my books, that was really where the boundary piece stuck and people were wanting more. And that's why I wrote the book about Setting Boundaries Will Set You Free, because the boundary portion of that relationship book, because really it's ultimately the relationship with yourself first and foremost. And really, the invitation, the through line becomes, especially for, as I was saying before, the people pleasers and the peacekeepers and the conflict avoiders. Yeah. If you've been living other referenced, if you've been abandoning yourself, the invitation becomes, are you willing to give yourself permission to consider yourself and your own needs at least as much as you consider everybody else? At least as much. Yeah. And then it becomes, are you willing to consider yourself more than you consider everyone else? And then really what I say is like the boundary ninja move is, are you willing to consider yourself first before you consider everyone else?
Yep.
And to me, that is the evolution.
Mm-hmm. It's beautiful. Wow. I gotta be, I'm still in the 9 hours. I'm like, I went through a divorce process. We had a meeting with kids, and I'm like,
I know.
Like, I'm not even, my head's, I totally with you the whole time. Just like, that is, you definitely get these like big, it's like that message. You can't avoid that. You can't avoid that sign that something's, wow.
Yeah.
Wow. But what I'm getting to is that the ability now, I'm just listening to know your boundary, to know how to put yourself right. Like it feels to me like, obviously writing this book, like it is clear, it is sealed in you, and you're able to really, you're on the other side. Many people get to the end and don't learn this.
Most people, I would even say, and, I've obviously been, working with a lot of people around this. I've been coaching, I've been teaching. And, first of all, the number one thing that will come back at me is, isn't that selfish?
Oh gosh, we could talk about that. It's,
right? Right. And, I am on this, I'm on this rampage to reclaim selfishness.
Yeah.
Because selfish gets a really bad rap. And the thing is that we disown selfish and then we're left with selfless, where we have vanished.
Yeah. 100%.
And so I always say that selfish, self-love, and self-care are three sisters whose job it is to support us in honoring ourselves.
Absolutely, Nancy. I wrote about this once, and I called it like the self-full. If you're not full in yourself,
right.
you really, I've been there. You can't give anything. And it's almost selfish for somebody to expect you to honor them first, really, other than, okay, dependents, children, I get like,
of course. But
even then there's some basic self-care, I'm with you.
Yeah. And it doesn't become, and just because there are people who are depending on us doesn't mean that we don't actually get to give ourselves what we need in a nurturing and nourishing and resourcing way as well. It is the old, put the oxygen mask on yourself first. Yeah. And, it's really critical. It's really, really critical. And, so I hear obviously in hand with the selfish question is also, all the guilt that starts to arise. Mm-hmm. And I really believe that in this particular context, guilt is an indicator that you're on the right track.
I love that.
When you feel the guilt,
love that.
It really is here to show you, oh, you're doing something that might feel uncomfortable because it's unfamiliar, but you're doing something that actually honors you. Yeah. Yeah. And so the guilt in this particular context can really be here to say like, hey, you're on the right path. And if you can reframe it that way, it's actually really freeing.
I love what you just said. I'm actually connecting back to Louise for a sec. We love you, Louise.
Yeah.
Her Heal Your Life, her all of the ailments and the connection
Yes.
is all about,
Mm-hmm.
self-love. And I know when I was miserable and leaving this marriage, I mean, my thyroid stopped working. I had a disease out of it, and I'm clear that was from not listening to my voice. So you're saying this, and I'm like, here's the deal. Our body is wise, as we know. Like,
Totally.
there's real health implications not doing this. That's what I've learned. Like, it doesn't work for me. My body's like, so sorry, we're not doing that anymore.
And that is classic Louise. I mean,
yeah.
When I still was in my job and I was traveling like a madwoman, and I was, everything was crazy and all of this was going on, and I got vertigo.
Oh, interesting.
And it was, it literally grounded me. I could barely get from my bed to the bathroom without like throwing up on the way. It was horrible. And I couldn't even, and it was interesting that it happened when I was home. I was not on the road. It was like this spell between events. Mm-hmm. So I was home, and I called Louise, and I basically was like, Lulu, what the fuck? What's going on? And she said, and she's in her own way, she's like, darling, if you don't pay attention to the whispers, your body will take you out. Yeah. And it was just as simple as that. Yeah. Your body will take you out, and you will have to pay attention because you won't be able to move. Yeah. And it was mind-blowing to me, the way that it exactly happened, the way that it did, and what I needed to be paying attention to that I wasn't.
Yeah. I mean, and I would imagine just connecting what we're talking about back to the boundaries, and putting yourself, listening, putting yourself first, that there's going to be, like, you should almost expect, like, when you pass go through that, like, you're going to have some guilt. Like, it's just going to feel weird.
Yeah. And I would even say, that it's going to feel uncomfortable, especially if you've been placating and acquiescing and saying yes to everybody else your whole life. If you've been going into that knee-jerk yes that so many of us do because we want to be liked or loved, we don't want someone else to be angry or disappointed, we want to be the hero, whatever it is, we're never considering our own desire. Yeah. And, if we can just start to shift there, that when a direct request comes in, to actually check in, can I say no right away? Like, this is what I do. Yeah. Can I say no right away? Right. So if I can say no right away, I say no. If I can't say no right away, I say, I'm going to let you know tomorrow. Mm-hmm. So I can build in the space to actually check, is there a desire here that's true? Or am I trying to avoid something? Yeah. Because we all know what it's like to say yes, and then 2 seconds later, how the hell am I going to get out of this? Or we see the thing sitting like a lump on our calendar, and we're like, so let's actually nip this in the bud. And so let's actually say no to what's a no. And here's the other thing. No can be said with grace and gratitude. It doesn't have to be said with guilt and excuses. We don't need to give someone a song and a dance. We don't need to give anyone a reason. We can simply say, thank you for asking, I'm not available. Yeah. Or something to that effect. It doesn't have to be this long drawn out reason or explanation. And I think that that's something also that comes with being able to actually trust what's true for us instead of, so I'm going to totally back up to just giving sort of my definition of boundaries. So so I define a boundary as a limit that we set for ourselves around what we will or will not do, tolerate, or accept. So ultimately it's our decision around what's okay and what's not okay for us. And they're very personal. So, what's okay for you might not be for me, or vice versa. They're very personal. And another way of thinking about boundaries is the delineation between where I end and you begin.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So this is where codependency comes in, you know?
Talking about Melody Beattie's
Right.
no more.
Exactly. So this is right. This is where codependency really comes in. When I am essentially crossing the border of my own territory and going into yours. Right. To manage your experience or to take responsibility for something that's yours. Because here's the deal. And I'll say this is really, I would say the biggest myth people have about boundaries is that other people cross our boundaries. Yeah. That is the biggest myth going. Mm-hmm. So the truth is that if our boundaries are being crossed, we are the ones crossing them. Yeah. And just anyone listening who is wanting to fight me on this, just take a deep breath. Because this is a big one about taking responsibility. And the truth is that when we own that we are crossing our own boundaries or enabling someone else to cross, we're enabling our boundaries to be crossed. Yeah. Yeah. It moves us out of blame and victimhood and into responsibility and empowerment. And that's where we want to live. We want to live in empowerment. Yeah. And so if we can really step into that place of knowing that our boundaries are ours to hold. That's really the most important piece here. Mm-hmm. That if we set a boundary, we need to maintain it. So I hear clients say to me, I set a boundary, but he or she keeps crossing it. Right? So the deal is that a boundary is really about me naming what's okay or not okay. And it doesn't even always have to be expressed verbally, because ultimately my boundaries are between me and me, because I'm naming what's okay and what's not okay. And I'm naming what I'm going to do in order to honor myself. And that's the piece that most people forget. That's the piece that most people let dangling. And then what happens is we name a boundary that we don't uphold. And then we're the little girl who cries wolf. Because we're teaching people that what we say isn't what we mean. And we're teaching people that we're not really going to take care of ourselves. Yeah. So, this whole piece around knowing what a boundary is for ourselves has to begin with being able to locate ourselves. So if we've been abandoning ourselves, it's a tall order to come in. And instead of thinking, what does he think, or what does she think, or what does he need, what does she need, to actually say, what do I think and what do I need? Yeah. And that's where it has to begin. So in the permission to put yourself first, and in the making yourself a priority, and in actually making your own life the center of your own life, it has to begin with actually checking in. We're so used to taking everybody else's temperature to figure out how we feel, that is the ultimate, the codependency of wanting someone else to regulate us emotionally. What do I need to do or say to make everything be okay? All that. And to actually bring it back here first. What do I need? What do I want? How do I feel? What do I think? Is the place to actually begin, and to stay on my side of that border, out of someone else's territory. Because ultimately, someone else's response to my truth is not my responsibility to manage.
Say that one more. I'm with you. I love how you do that. Yeah.
Yeah. Someone else's response to my truth isn't my responsibility to manage. Mm-hmm. Stay on my own side of the borderline. And this is a way so many of us cross our own boundary. We go over into someone else's territory, trying to make it be okay, or trying to take responsibility, or trying to manage their experience of us. Wow. Just stay over here. And it's big. And so like this has sort of been this has been everything that I feel like I've been swimming in. And I think that this has been the greatest learning experience, of my life, being able to actually find myself without being defined by what's around me. Just find myself here.
Absolutely.
And I think anything that we can do that has us locate ourselves in that way is a piece of the puzzle.
Ooh, what an amazing. I feel like I was just in a movie with you. Like I actually got
I feel like I had a lot of monologues.
No, it's beautiful. It was amazing. I'm like really taking it in and just, this is so applicable. I think if for men too, but many women, I feel like I identify as an empath. If you're in that category,
yes, big time. Big time.
This is really, this is a big deal because I think, and I love just what I didn't meet Louise like you did, but my sense of her, one of the things I picked up on her right away is her boundaries and her ability to really honor herself. Like really no joke. I could feel it. I could feel it with her. I watched her, I observed her and I'm like, oh, she's really embodying this. Like, wow, I want to do that. And you are doing it. Amazing.
Thank you. That's a great compliment and just a great affirmation for me. Thank you.
Yeah. I'm like, she is so proud of you. I don't know, wherever she's, I feel like the baton, you're taking it.
Thank you.
This is so important. I'm like, I will be rereading these show notes I'm creating because I'm constantly working on this one. I've gotten really a lot better. And I think anyone listening, I mean, I know I have a ton of empath, highly sensitive, beautiful souls that tune in. And this is really, really powerful, Nancy. I'm grateful.
I love that you just said that. So, Dr. Christiane Northrup?
Yes, that is someone I would love to talk to. She is amazing.
She is amazing. She's fabulous. Yeah. So she wrote the foreword to the Boundary book, and I've known her for over 20 years. She's seen me through this whole thing. Wow. And she recently wrote a book called Dodging Energy Vampires, which is essentially about the empath narcissist relationship. And when she read this Boundary book, as she was going to write the foreword, she said, this really is the Empath Handbook.
Yeah.
For how to be able to be in the world, not measuring oneself against someone else. And so, so it is absolutely for the empath, because again, it returns us to, it takes the attention off of the other person and brings it back to ourselves, which is what we need to do as empaths.
Yeah.
We need to actually be able to feel ourselves.
Amen. 100%. I'm like, that's what I was thinking. This is literally word for word, the Empath's Guidebook. And now listening to you, I'm like, oh yeah, no, I in it right now. I mean, even when you I've practiced a lot, and those that are listening you might have practiced. And I don't know, do you find it still comes up for you? Do you feel like do you still ever feel that little thing in your stomach, or have you sort of moved through that? Like, do you ever feel a little bit of either guilt or weirdness, or is that kind of at this point not there anymore?
I would say I don't feel guilt anymore.
Yeah.
What I would say is, I can feel discomfort.
Yeah.
But I also know that I want to choose the short-term discomfort over the long-term resentment.
Yeah. There you go.
So I can get myself through the discomfort more easily now. Yeah. And again, like what I was saying before, about recognizing that we're the ones crossing our own boundaries takes us out of victim and takes us out of blame and puts us into responsibility and empowerment. Remembering that also really helps when we remember that boundaries are not telling someone what to do or what not to do.
Yeah.
You know, boundaries aren't about the other person's behavior.
Well said. Yeah.
Boundaries are all about us.
Yeah.
And that boundaries are not, we mostly think about boundaries as being contracting or constricting or restrictive. It's the way that we relate to the word.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I also choose to say that, boundaries are expansive.
Yeah.
In that they support us in being able to really carefully choose and consciously curate what we want in our lives.
Yeah.
So it goes both ways.
Yeah. That's beautifully said about it. And I think, just getting, to me, what I've seen through not having them, first of all, there's an integrity with yourself that develops.
100%.
Really loving. I'm living through having done this in many different ways. And I can say, most comfortable with. Some I'm still like learning how to do that. It's just it was not my modus operandi beforehand, like you. And so I love that you're sharing. It's so inspirational. And I know people listening are going to be like, all right, if she can do that and go from like the journal and the 9-hour meeting and
totally.
Like, anybody can do this.
Anybody can do this. And it is a practice.
Yeah.
It is a practice.
Yeah.
What I ultimately think is that eventually we get to this place where we're not setting boundaries every single day because it becomes a way of life. Yeah. And all that really means is that we're living in alignment with what's true for us. That we're just always living in alignment with our truth. We're choosing what's true as opposed to going along to get along, or choosing to acquiesce, or choosing to downplay. We're actually choosing what's true here for me, and I'm going to live in alignment with that. And then I'm in integrity in relationship with myself.
Beautiful. Oh my gosh. Well, this was one of the more amazing, inspiring, empowering. I'm like, I don't even want this to end, as you can tell.
Like, me too.
You are a total gift. I'm so grateful for you, for your experience and what you've harvested and then sharing it, and just your light, and just amazing. Really, like I keep coming up with like, what an amazing, beautiful human being. How inspirational. And especially I think right now, to have that kind of like light is important, and to remember we all can create that, that boundary, that self alignment ourselves. We need to, not just can. Yeah. Thank you, Nancy. Oh my gosh.
Thank you. This has been such a treat.